Adversaries under President Washington, the battle between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson over establishing a national bank, by Emily Harkleroad. It was during the era after the Revolutionary War, and George Washington was the president. He had chosen his cabinet carefully. As his Secretary of the Treasury, he chose the young and well-educated immigrant who became his right-hand man during the Revolutionary War, and the writer of several Federalist papers, Alexander Hamilton, an eager and enterprising man. And as his Secretary of State, he chose the intelligent and knowledgeable writer of the Declaration of Independence and former diplomat in France during the Revolutionary War, Thomas Jefferson, who was a circuitous and behind-the-scenes man. These two men were rivals from the beginning, and one subject they could not agree on was whether or not it was constitutional or beneficial to establish a national bank for their new country. They both had very different views on what would contribute to America. The cabinet had become divided over this issue. Hamilton and Jefferson's rivalry is even depicted in the hit Broadway musical Hamilton, and there is a song dedicated to this debate for the bank called Cabinet Battle No. 1. It showed what Jefferson thought about Hamilton's plan for the bank.
Now place your bets as to who that benefits. The very seat of government where Hamilton sits.
Not true!
Oh, if the shoe fits, wear it.
It also showed what Hamilton said in response to Jefferson defending his plan for the bank.
If we assume the debts the union gets, a new line of credit, a financial diuretic, how do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost, you'd rather give it a sedative?
Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson seem to have been complete opposites. Hamilton had a fighting spirit, unlike Jefferson. But the emphasis of constitutional fidelity is one thing both Hamilton and Jefferson agreed on. Constitutional fidelity is the need to make sure that the policies of the government are guided by the correct meaning of the Constitution. But they disagreed over who should have more power. So as Jefferson's followers and Hamilton's followers began to argue over which way the new country should go, parties formed in the cabinet. Their dispute turned primarily on the meaning of the necessary and proper clause. Hamilton wanted the bank because he saw the advantage of Britain's system. Hamilton believed that state debts should be absorbed by the government to pay them off. Hamilton had written many documents about trying to establish a bank. He had written to a man named Isaac Sears, "It is necessary, or we shall play a losing game. We must have a government with more power. We must have a bank." He wrote a report on a national bank to give evidence on why the bank should be established, saying, "The Secretary respectfully reports that a national bank is an institution of primary importance to the prosperous administration of the finances, and would be of the greatest utility in the operations connected with the support of the public credit." He also wrote the argument of the Secretary of the Treasury upon the constitutionality of a national bank, saying, "Then it follows that a power of erecting a corporation may as well be implied as any other thing. It may as well be employed as an instrument or means of carrying into execution any of the specified powers as any other instrument or mean whatever." Earlier on, Hamilton had already made a bank for New York, writing "The Constitution and Outline of a Charter for the Bank of New York." Hamilton's main purpose for founding the bank was to pay off the major war debts and to create a common currency throughout the United States. Thomas Jefferson wanted the new country to live in an agrarian style, But Jefferson saw Hamilton's want to strengthen the central government and presidency as dangerous and threatening to republicanism and agrarian lifestyle. Jefferson favored that decentralized agricultural government and feared tyranny. Jefferson was a main leader to the Republican Party when it formed. Jefferson and his followers thought the national bank would interfere with the development of state banks, and that it would not be beneficial to poor farmers, but to wealthy businessmen. It would be corrupt. He said, if the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless. He thought that a bank did not agree with the Constitution or was unconstitutional. He said, the incorporation of a bank and the powers assumed by this bill have not, in my opinion, been delegated to the United States by the Constitution. Jefferson thought it was unfair to have states with less debt pay other states' debts. Jefferson had said of Hamilton's opinion that he thought that a man could be governed by only one of two methods, force or interest. He then said that Hamilton went with the motive of interest. Washington then said of both Jefferson and Hamilton that they did not exercise more charity in deciding on the opinions and actions of one another. George Washington also said, differences in political opinions are as unavoidable as, to a certain point, they may perhaps be necessary. But it is to be regretted exceedingly that subjects cannot be discussed with temper on the one hand, or decisions submitted to, without having the motives which led to them improperly implicated on the other. And this regret borders on chagrin when we find that men in abilities, zealous patriots, having the same general objects in view and the same upright intentions to prosecute them, will not exercise more charity in deciding on the opinions and actions of one another. James Madison had said in a letter to Jefferson that Hamilton, during his administration, deceived farmers with false statements. But Washington still followed much of Hamilton's advice while he was the president, which was distressing in Jefferson's case. It was said by James McHenry that Hamilton ruled Washington and would still rule if he could. Hamilton wrote to Washington, answering doubts that he had about the bank. Washington agreed more with Hamilton's arguments than with Jefferson's. After Washington's constitutional doubts about the bank were answered, he signed the legislation, and on February 25, 1791, Washington signed the bank's bill into law. On December 12, 1791, the First National Bank was opened. It was located in Carpenter's Hall, in the then capital, Philadelphia. Hamilton's bank achieved the management of private banks in several states. It had 8 branches throughout the colonies. Before the bank was founded, the creation of money was carried out by individual states and also by private competing banks, but Hamilton created a common currency. The bank made good on the constitutional rights to collect taxes, borrow money, regulate trade, and support fleets and armies. And so in the end, Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists came out victorious. Hamilton's bank plan was carried out, and it brought the states together economically. But we will never forget the contribution both men made to form our country.